who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Val Macer, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Sunday, December 14th issue of the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First article is TSA Flyer Data Aids ICE Efforts by Hamed Aliaziz. The Trump administration is providing the names of all air travelers to immigration officials, substantially expanding its use of data sharing to expel people under deportation orders. Under the previously undisclosed program, the Transportation Security Administration provides a list multiple times a week to Immigration and Customs Enforcement of travelers who will be coming through airports. ICE can then match the list against its own database of people subject to deportation and send agents to the airport to detain those people. It's unclear how many arrests have been made as a result of the collaboration, but documents obtained by the New York Times show that it led to the arrest of Eni Lucia Lopez Beloza, a college student picked up at the Boston Logan Airport on November 20th and deported to Honduras 2 days later. A former ICE official said 75% of instances in that official's region where names were flagged by the program yielded arrests. ICE has historically avoided interfering with domestic travel, but the partnership between the airport security and the immigration agency, which began quietly in March, is the latest way the Trump administration is increasing cooperation and information sharing between federal agencies in service of the president's goal of carrying out the largest deportation campaign in U.S. history. The message to those in the country illegally is clear. The only reason you should be flying is to self-deport home, said Tricia McLaughlin, a spokeswoman for the Department of Homeland Security. Airline passengers have long been subject to some federal scrutiny. Airlines typically provide passenger information to TSA after a flight is reserved. That information is compared against national security databases, including the Terrorist Screening Data Set, which includes the names of individuals on a watch list of known or suspected terrorists. But the TSA previously did not get involved in domestic, criminal, or immigration matters, said one former agency official who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss the issue freely. Among the concerns, the former official said, has been that enforcement activities at airports could distract from airport security and contribute to longer passenger wait times. If you have more officers conducting arrests at airports, it puts more strain on the system, delays and complications that may annoy and frighten some travelers, and those who are unaware of their status will move away from air travel, said Claire Trickler McNulty, a senior ICE official during the Biden administration. It will continue to reduce the space where people feel safe going about their business. The push to ramp up enforcement is pervasive inside the Department of Homeland Security, which houses both ICE and TSA. Earlier this year, Stephen Miller, a top White House official, floated a goal of 3,000 immigration arrests a day and met with top ICE officials about how to increase deportations. Some former ICE officials said the program would be a huge help to an agency struggling to meet the numbers of deportations sought by the Trump administration. The administration has turned routine travel into a force multiplier for removals, potentially identifying thousands who thought they could evade the law simply by boarding a plane, said Scott Makowski, the former deputy head of ICE office in the New York City area. This isn't about fear. It's about restoring order and ensuring every American knows their government enforces its laws without apology. The airport has an added benefit to authorities of a location where potential targets have been scanned for weapons. And, as in the case of Ms. Lopez, people flagged as part of the program have been able to be apprehended and deported very quickly. Ms. Lopez, 19, had a previous deportation order. In 2018, according to internal records, her case had been referred to ICE for potential arrest. Despite that, she said she did not know about the order and was able to continue to live in the country without issues. More recently, she was attending Babson College, where she was studying business as a freshman. Things changed on November 20th when Ms. Lopez arrived at the Boston Logan Airport on her way to Texas. She went through security with her Honduran passport without incident, she said, and arrived at her gate early enough to grab a cup of coffee. When it was time to board, however, her boarding pass didn't work. The second time it was scanned, she noticed an X on the computer screen in front of the agent, who told her to go to customer service to figure out what was happening, she said. "Oh, you're Annie," said one of the federal agents waiting for her, according to Ms. Lopez. Internal records show she was initially detained by U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents. He was, well, like, "You're going to come with us. You're going to be filling out a bunch of paperwork," she recalled. I was like, "Well, I have to be boarding my plane because I have to leave right now." And he was like, "Well, I don't think you're even going to be on that flight." Activists blasted the airport deportation program as one intended to frighten immigrants. This is another attempt to terrorize and punish communities and will make people terrified to ever leave their homes for fear of being unjustly detained and disappeared out of the country before they have a chance to contest the detention, said Robin Bernard, Senior Director of Refugee Advocacy at Human Rights First, an immigrant advocacy organization. Documents obtained by the New York Times show that Ms. Lopez's arrest involved an ICE office in California that plays a key role in the airport program. The office, called the Pacific Enforcement Response Center, sends tips to immigration officers across the country and requests to local jails to hold immigrants. Documents show the office flagged Ms. Lopez's flight information to ICE officers in Boston. The document details how this is part of a collaboration with the Transportation Security Administration to send actionable leads to the field regarding aliens with a final order of removal that appear to have an impending flight scheduled. A former ICE official with knowledge of the airport program said the California office often sends several tips a day on potential arrests at airports in the region the official worked in. The former official, who spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss internal law enforcement matters, said ICE officers received the passenger's flight number and departure time, as well as a photo of the target, sometimes just hours before the plane took off. The program is particularly effective because it allows ICE to quickly deport those who are arrested, the former official said. The arrest of Ms. Lopez is not the only one from the program that has led to media attention. In late October, Marta Brizea Renderos Levia, a woman from El Salvador, was arrested at the airport in Salt Lake City. Ms. Levia also had a final deportation order. Video of the arrest shows her yelling as officers pulled her out of the airport. Internal records obtained by the Times show that Ms. Levia's flight information had been tipped off to local officers by the California office as well. The Trump administration has tried to leverage other databases to track down immigrants it wants to detain or deport, including the IRS, which earlier this year agreed to hand over the addresses of migrants to ICE. A federal court blocked that effort in November. Ms. Lopez's case drew publicity in part because she had no criminal record. She had been planning to go home and spend Thanksgiving with her family, including going to church and eating Thanksgiving dinner together. It was a surprise trip. I was thinking, okay, this is what I'm going to do with them, she recalled about the plans she had to spend time with her relatives. This day I'm going to do this. This day I'm going to be with, friends, family, and stuff like that. That was the only thing that was going through my mind. Now, in Honduras, she is trying to figure out a way to transfer colleges. She misses going to church with her family, to a Texas grocery chain, and her mother's cooking, she said. Julie Cresswell has written a front-page article on less steak, higher prices, and restaurants caught in the middle. In early November, as Hall's Chop House was heading into the critical holiday season, its president, Tommy Hall, made a tough call. Prices at his steakhouse chain would go up. The price of the popular 8-ounce filet mignon rose to $61 from $57. The price of a ribeye increased $3 to $85. Beef prices have been climbing all year, and Hall's found itself in a code red, said Mr. Hall, who heads up Hall's Chop House, which is family-owned and has 5 steakhouses in the Southeast. We had to raise prices or we weren't going to be able to cover costs, he said. Every time we do a price increase, I have butterflies in my stomach, wondering how the customers will take it. For steakhouses like Hall's, December is the biggest month of the year. It's when companies rent out private back rooms for lavish parties. Corporate expense accounts cover 2 martini lunches, and families treat themselves to a night of steak, bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon, and sides of creamed spinach, truffle mac and cheese, and au gratin potatoes. But this holiday season, many steakhouses, from fine dining restaurants to mid-price chains like Texas Roadhouse and Longhorn Steakhouse, are walking a tightrope. They have to balance raising menu prices enough to cover at least some of their expenses, but not so much that consumers stop walking through their doors. With the nation's cattle inventory at its lowest level since the 1950s, ground beef, chuck roasts, and steak have surged in price over the last 2 years. Restaurants that specialize in steak are feeling the same sticker shock as consumers in grocery stores, as the price of USDA choice boneless steak has soared 20% in the past year to an average of $14.13 a pound, according to September data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The steak had hit a record high of $14.32 in August. How much restaurants can raise menu prices depends largely on who their customers are. Many fine dining steakhouses, which typically sell high grades of prime steak to high-income diners, say they are seeing little pushback as they price an 8-ounce filet mignon above $60. But when the mid-price chain Outback Steakhouse raised its prices over the last couple of years, consumers balked. Traffic nosedived, it closed locations, and the stock of its parent company, Bloomin' Brands, plummeted nearly 47% in the past year. The question for Outback is, did they take too much price and that negatively impacted the guest experience? Asked Brian Vaccaro, the restaurant analyst at the investment bank Raymond James. A spokesman for Bloomin' Brands said, "We're focused on meeting guests where they are by offering high-quality steaks and a variety of price points that deliver strong value." Still, despite the surge in beef prices, Americans have not slowed their consumption of burgers and steaks. Consumers will eat an average of 58.5 pounds of beef this year, a touch lower than last year's 59.1 pounds, according to forecasts in August by the Agriculture Department. Some economists attribute the continued robust demand for beef with a strong growth in salaries in the United States. Average hourly earnings rose 3.8% in the past year to $36.67, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data for September. There are certain people who will never put steak on the table because their income situation won't allow for it, said Michael Swanson, the chief agricultural economist at Wells Fargo Agri-Food Institute. But a whole number of other cohorts are doing fine and would prefer to continue to buy steak no matter where the price goes. Executives at Omaha Steaks, a meat and food delivery company, said pre-orders for this year's holiday season were up 15% from last year. Nate Rempe, the chief executive of Omaha Steaks, said about 45% of the company's yearly sales take place during the holiday season, with a box of filet mignon selling every 2.7 seconds in December. The company has not raised prices for its steak and other meats this year because it's stockpiled beef when prices dipped during the year and froze that meat for future sales. It will be 2027 before pricing comes down meaningfully, Mr. Remke said. But I'm an opportunistic commodities buyer. We can build our inventory at lower costs. Trying to hedge costs by buying at select times is more difficult for restaurants, which typically rely on fresh cuts of meat. Moreover, Dr. Swanson said changes in feeding practices and other improvements by ranchers had led to a shift in the quality of beef in the country, with most fitting into two categories. The highest, prime grade, which is typically sold to finer restaurants, and choice, which is frequently found in mid-price chains. Select, which is usually the least expensive and accounted for 30% of beef sold in 2010, made up about 14% of the market in 2024, according to the Agriculture Department. Big chains can use their size to get better prices from meat producers or packers, but prices are still challenging their businesses. Prices for beef and other ingredients surged 7.9% in the third quarter from the year earlier for Texas Roadhouse. But profit margins shrank as the company kept price increases relatively low to retain customers. The company's stock has fallen 14% in the past year. The company raised prices about 1.7% in the fourth quarter, executives in a November earnings call said, adding that consumers had not been scared off. Business did appear to be booming on a recent Friday evening at a Texas Roadhouse in North Plainfield, New Jersey. The parking lot was full and about 30 people stood in the entryway waiting for tables. Inside the boisterous Western-themed restaurant, servers balanced trays of steak, burgers, and margaritas. There, an 8-ounce Texas filet mignon with rolls and honey cinnamon butter plus 2 sides totaled $28.99. Texas Roadhouse did not respond to emails requesting comment. Jesse Jim's Steakhouse, a casual restaurant in Kansas City, Missouri, is also being careful not to raise prices too much, said Debbie Vanoy, manager at the restaurant, who is also a member of the family that has owned the restaurant for 87 years. We raise prices, but not by a lot, Ms. Vanoy said, noting that the price of a popular 12-ounce prime ribeye dinner that includes salad and a side has gone to an 8-ounce filet also costs $43.99. But some customers who have been reliable beef eaters, Ms. Vanoy said, had made some changes. Now they're sometimes getting chicken or pork chops. They're limiting their steak purchases a little bit. Still, on an early December weekday at Hall's Chop House in Charleston, South Carolina, as Mr. Hall prepared for the dinner crowd, he said 5 of his restaurants were fully booked through the holiday season. People are still buying the more expensive cuts, the bone-in filet, the tomahawk steak, the Kansas City strip steak, he said. The volume of those cuts has been holding steady. As for what happens next year, that is tougher to predict. I'm not so nervous about December, Mr. Hall said, but I'm extremely nervous about January and February. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the December 14th New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Robin George Andrews wrote, "Lurking disaster threatens Istanbul. Something ominous is happening deep below the Sea of Marmara in Turkey. A fault line beneath this inland body of water, which links the Black Sea with the Aegean Sea, has caught the attention of scientists. Over the last 2 decades, earthquakes of rising magnitude have occurred, steadily moving east. The latest in this sequence, in April, was a magnitude 6.2 trembler. Even if the pattern were to continue, eventually a large quake would reach the waters just south of Turkey's largest city. Istanbul is in the crosshairs," said Stephen Hicks, a seismologist at the University College London, who was not involved with the new study. The new research, published Thursday in the journal Science, suggests that powerful quakes are marching toward a 9 to 13 mile long, locked up part of what scientists call the main Marmara Fault. That has the potential to unleash a tumult with a magnitude of 7.0 or greater on a city of 16 million people. The precise nature and timing of this seismic shock are uncertain. Earthquakes cannot be predicted, said Patricia Martinez Garzon, a seismologist at the GFZ Helmholtz Center for Geosciences in Germany and the author of the new study. But understanding how this event might be initiated is of vital importance. We need to focus on the mitigation and the early detection of any signals that tell us something out of the ordinary is happening, she said. Turkey is no stranger to catastrophic earthquakes. In February 2023, a pair of earthquakes, including a magnitude 7.8, followed just hours later by a magnitude 7.5, obliterated parts of southern Turkey and Syria, killing at least 55,000 people. And the notion that a future quake pummeling Istanbul isn't novel. Experts agree on a grim inevitability. A very large earthquake striking near Istanbul will likely cause one of the worst humanitarian disasters in recent history, said Judith Hubbard, an earthquake scientist at Cornell University, who was not involved in the study. The peril highlighted in the new study involves the North Anatolian Fault Line, a geological boundary where the Anatolian tectonic plate slides sideways against the Eurasian plate. A swath of this 750-mile-long fault zone has been active in modern times, but a section of it, named the main Marmara Fault, which is under the sea southwest of Istanbul, has been suspiciously calm. A magnitude 7.1 quake struck the city in 1766, but ever since the roughly 100-mile-long section has not ruptured. The new study, which examined the past 20 years of quakes on the fault, noticed something odd. In 2019, a magnitude 5.2 quake hit a western part of the main Marmara Fault, followed by a magnitude 5.1 quake to the east in 2012. In September 2019, a magnitude 5.8 trembler rocked the central part of the main Marmara Fault. Then, in April 2025, just to its east, there was a magnitude 6.2. Will the next quake be stronger than the last? And if so, will it appear on the fault right below Istanbul? The study's authors think that's a possibility. There is no guarantee that the next quake will be the magnitude 7 or above cataclysm everyone dreads, but an additional, fairly strong quake on the fault may load more stress onto its eastern section, which could trigger that feared rupture. And as small increases in magnitude correspond to giant leaps in released energy, even a quake in the middle to high sixes could be significantly damaging for the city. It isn't clear why quakes occasionally propagate along a fault, but they have been known to happen in the past, including on the North Anatolian Fault Zone itself. Still, the researchers include only 4 modern quakes in their analysis, a number that may be insufficient to identify a pattern. I think there's a good chance that these are just typical earthquakes that happen to look like they are migrating, Dr. Hubbard said. But even if skepticism is warranted over this set of data, dangerous stress is clearly building on this fault. A giant destructive quake is coming. The deadliness of this destined quake depends on many factors, including the direction of the rupture. A recent study, also co-authored by Dr. Martinez Garzon, warns that it's somewhat likelier to rip toward the east, unfortunately in Istanbul's direction. But as was the case with Turkey's 2023 double quake disaster, it is the human factor that may prime Istanbul for tragedy. Decades of unregulated growth and densification of the city, combined with a lack of enforced building standards and development on unstable soils, have set up this dangerous situation, Dr. Hubbard said. Russian attacks pummel key Ukrainian port, by Kim Barker. The assault comes amid a new round of talks between Kyiv and its allies. Russian drones and missiles pummeled Odessa, Ukraine overnight on Friday into Saturday in one of the largest attacks of the war on the southern port, causing major power outages that plunged part of the city into darkness. The attack targeted energy, industrial, and other infrastructure in several regions of South Ukraine, leaving much of Odessa, the country's largest Black Sea port, without power, heat, and water, Ukrainian officials said. Hospitals and public drinking water stations were switched onto generators. Officials did not report any deaths. The bombardment came amid a flurry of diplomatic talks to end the war, which started nearly 4 years ago with Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, or to at least secure a limited ceasefire. Ukrainian, European, and American officials have shuttled across the globe in recent weeks for negotiations over a U.S. push to quickly end the conflict. President Trump, arguing that Ukraine is losing, wants President Volodymyr Zelensky to agree to deal that would require the country to cede land for peace. Mr. Zelensky and his European allies are resisting while also trying to ensure that the United States does not walk away from Ukraine. Negotiators from Europe, the United States, and Ukraine were to meet over the weekend in Berlin, a senior German official said on Saturday, speaking on the condition of anonymity. Mr. Zelensky and the European leaders are expected to hold talks on Monday. It is important that everyone now sees what Russia is doing. Every step they take in terror against our people, all of their attacks, for this is clearly not about ending the war, Mr. Zelensky said on social media after the strikes on Saturday. For all of our diplomatic efforts to yield results, pressure must also be applied to the aggressor so that they end the war that they started. but President Vladimir Putin of Russia has shown little appetite for any peace deal. On Friday, President Recep Erdogan of Turkey told Mr. Putin in a meeting on the sideline of a summit in Turkmenistan that limited ceasefire for energy facilities and ports would be beneficial and a step toward a broader peace deal in the war, according to a statement from Mr. Erdogan's office. Mr. Erdogan has called Mr. Putin his dear friend in the past, and Turkey has tried to broker a truce between Russia and Ukraine on attacks in shipping lanes in the Black Sea, which endanger Turkey's own interests. But Moscow has resisted those calls. After Ukraine hit 2 vessels of Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet in late November in the Black Sea, Mr. Putin threatened to cut off Ukraine from the sea. Russia is thought to use these tankers to transport oil covertly, avoiding sanctions and raising money to fund its war. Ukraine hit another vessel in the fleet on Wednesday. Hours after the conversation between Mr. Putin and Mr. Erdogan on Friday, Russian strikes hit 2 Ukrainian ports on the Odessa region on the Black Sea. Those attacks damaged 3 Turkish-owned vessels, Ukrainian officials said. The owner of one of those ships said on Friday it had been carrying food supplies. Oleksiy Kuleba, Ukrainian's deputy prime minister for restoration, said the attacks on civilian ports needed a clear international response with increased protection of shipping and pressure on Russia. Russia also repeatedly targeted Ukraine's energy infrastructure this fall, affecting power nationwide. Half of the capital, Kyiv, did not have power on Tuesday. On Friday night, Russia sent 465 drones and 30 missiles into Ukraine, according to the Ukrainian Air Force. The overnight attacks also caused power outages in the nearby regions of Mykolaiv and Kherson, as well as in parts of northern and eastern Ukraine. Emergency restoration work will begin as soon as the security situation allows, the country energy minister said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Cho Sang-hung has written an article called North Korea Pays Tribute to Its Soldiers Aiding Russia. North Korea's leader, Kim Jong-un, welcomed home specialized soldiers last week after a deployment in Russia's war against Ukraine, honoring 9 killed in action with his country's highest medal, the state news media reported on Saturday. The event was North Korea's first public acknowledgement that it had sent specialized troops, combat engineers tasked with mine-clearing operations, to aid Russia in the war. The Kremlin said in July that North Korea had agreed to send 1,000 combat engineers and 5,000 military construction workers to help rebuild Russia's war-torn Kursk region. Earlier, up to 15,000 North Korean troops fought alongside Russian troops there to drive out Ukrainian soldiers. The state news media said the combat engineers returned home after a demining operation in Kursk. A large welcoming ceremony was held on Friday in a plaza on Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, where Mr. Kim thanked the troops for their sacred mission. You could work a miracle of turning a vast area of danger zone into a safe and secure one in a matter of less than 3 months, Mr. Kim said in a speech to returning members of North Korea's 528th Regiment of Engineers. Except for the heartrending loss of 9 lives, all the officers and soldiers of the regiment have returned to the motherland. Photographs in the state news media showed Mr. Kim hugging returning soldiers, including 5 in wheelchairs. He affixed medals designating North Korea's heroes to portraits of the 9 killed in action and knelt to place white chrysanthemums before a memorial wall. Family members of the dead soldiers were shown touching their sons' portraits in tears, photographs shown. North Korea has aided Russia's war efforts by sending not only its troops, but also large shipments of artillery shells, missiles, and other weapons. During the war, Moscow and Pyongyang revived their Cold War-era treaty of mutual defense and cooperation. South Korean intelligence officials and analysts said Russia has reciprocated by providing North Korea with fuel, food, and military materials and technologies that they fear could help modernize its military. At least hundreds of North Korean troops are believed to have been killed in the war, they said. Since June, North Korea has publicly paid tribute to fallen soldiers and honored returning troops with medals to bolster domestic support for Mr. Kim's decision to join Russia's war against Ukraine. The state news media has shown what it says is footage of North Korean troops charging into minefields or heavy gunfire without hesitation, as well as wounded soldiers detonating grenades to kill themselves rather than to be taken prisoner. Emma Bubola has written an article called Latin America Facing Shift Rightward Amid Fears About a Crime Wave. Nestled in the sky-high plateaus of the Chilean Andes, amid grazing alpacas and clear water streams, the squat adobe houses of indigenous farmers now had tall aluminum gates and iron grills welded to their windows. I live in fear, says Erica Moscoso, 57, a baker born in the village, who recently installed locks on her doors for the first time to ward off criminals. We never had this before. That fear has filtered through Miss Moscato's sun-drenched patio in the small village of Caraquima, near Chile's northeastern border with Bolivia, and spread down the country's spindly length to the capital, Santiago, and extending south into Patagonia. A sharp increase in murders and other violent crimes in recent years, fueled by rapid expansion of international criminal groups, has shaken a country long accustomed to relative safety, becoming a dominant political issue likely to help push Chile to the right in a presidential election on Sunday. But fears over violence extend well beyond Chile. Across Latin America, organized crime has surged over the past decade, with violence gripping once peaceful countries like Chile, Costa Rica, and Ecuador. Polls show that in at least 8 countries, including Chile, security is the dominant voter concern, driving many Latin Americans to demand iron-fisted measures and show a greater tolerance for tough-on-crime policies. This has made a role model out of President Nayib Bukele of El Salvador, who has cracked down on civil rights to drastically lower his small country's crime rate. Some leaders, like President Rodrigo Chavez of Costa Rica, have sought to emulate Mr. Bukele's hardline security measures, which have even drawn unexpected interest from Uruguay's leftist president. In Chile, the issue of security has bolstered the popularity of right-wing candidates, including Jose Antonio Cast, who is likely to be elected president and met last month with Mr. Bukele's security minister. Crime has also become a key concern likely to influence elections next year in Peru, Colombia, and Costa Rica. Organized crime is a highly transformational force, said Will Freeman, a fellow for Latin America Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Now the region is sorting out the downstream consequences of it. Chile is still one of the safest countries in Latin America, and some question the severity of the crisis that is an interplay between reality, politics, and public perception. But few dispute that crime has traumatized Chileans in profound and consequential ways. Across Chile, homicides reached a record high of 1,322 in 2022, government figures show. And though the number fell to 1,207 in 2024, that is still 43% higher than in 2018. Less than 40% of Chileans feel safe walking at night, according to the Gallup survey. In the United States, that figure is 70%. The crisis started in the north. At the onset of the coronavirus pandemic in 2020, tens of thousands of migrants, mostly Venezuelans fleeing economic collapse, started trekking through the Atacama Desert to Iquique, a sprawling port city of about 900 miles north of Santiago, with skyscrapers wedged between a giant sand dune and the Pacific Ocean. The local authorities became overwhelmed with what they described as a humanitarian and sanitary crisis, with children walking over the pampas amid hard-blowing wind and makeshift encampments taking over the city's neoclassical plazas. Though people who have committed crimes are a tiny fraction of the hundreds of thousands of Venezuelans who have arrived in Chile, prosecutors, the authorities, and experts say the influx has also included gangs whose victims are frequently other migrants. Renzo Tessotti, a lawmaker from Iquique and a member of Mr. Cast's party, said the increase in migration and crime had created a very dangerous effect of xenophobia in the city, which has historically been a cosmopolitan mix of indigenous communities, Europeans, Asians, Bolivians, and Colombians. People ask me very firmly to be extremely hard on illegal immigration, he said. During a protest in Iquique in September 2021, people burned mattresses and clothing belonging to homeless migrants and chanted Chileans first. Mr. Cast, then a candidate for the 2021 presidential election, traveled to the region, railing against immigration and crime and promising to dig ditches along the frontier. His popularity soared, but he was defeated a few months later by Gabriel Boric, a left-wing leader whose promises of equity and social justice were embraced by voters as bigger priorities. Since then, worries over security have intensified, and Mr. Cast has mobilized more voters around the issue. In Iquique, disturbing police reports started documenting a type of violence that was unknown. It was like anything Chile had ever known. People tied up with a bullet in their head, burned inside a car, murdered and torched, said Mauricio Machiavello, the city's mayor, things we never imagined. The police said criminal gangs like Tren de Aragua from Venezuela had also migrated to Chile and sunk their teeth into Iquique, a city of about 200,000 people. The number of murder cases in Tarapacá, a region that includes Iquique, climbed to 53 in 2021 from 20 the previous year, according to government data. In 2022, 3 people killed by machete were found in a pet cemetery in the region, and the body of a trans woman washed ashore on a beach in Iquique, and the authorities accused 2 Colombian men of killing her. This year, a Venezuelan man was stabbed more than 70 times and decapitated. Ruthless, said the head of the regional police force, Mauricio Jorquera Ramirez. I don't know if tomorrow there will be a mugging and a gunshot on a street corner, said Francesca Barraza Campos, who lives in Iquique. Still, in many ways, the situation in Iquique has improved. The government deployed the army to the Bolivian border in 2023, and the number of migrants the authorities say they intercept has dwindled from hundreds a day to a few dozen. A number of killings in Tarapacá has fallen significantly after Mr. Boric was created. Special organized crime and homicide teams and cartel leaders were prosecuted and convicted. Still, in Iquique, any talk of improvement has been subsumed by the louder clamor about the crisis around crime and migration. It stuck, Mr. Machiavello, Iquique mayor said. The fear took hold. In Quibe, a small village on the road from the Bolivian border to Iquique, an 83-year-old woman was killed in her home this year. It pains me and it scares me, a neighbor of the victim, Cipriana Vasquez, 60, said, bursting into tears. As Ms. Vasquez, a quinoa farmer, walked through town pointing at broken windows and other signs of vandalism, she said her neighbors had insisted that she vote for Mr. Cast. Mr. Cast has made security his top priority and has promised to change Chilean law to make it a crime to enter the country without authorization. He vowed to build a physical barrier along Chile's border, echoing President Trump's border wall. Mr. Cast has also warned illegal migrants to self-deport or face deportation if he is elected. His warnings have pushed some migrants to cross into Peru, prompting Jose Herrera, the Peruvian president, to declare a state of emergency at the border. As in other countries in the region, crime has soared in Peru in recent years, particularly extortion. Many Peruvians favor applying a heavy hand to criminals. A poll out this year found, even if it crosses the line and risks ensnaring innocent people. In Costa Rica, Mr. Chavez has adopted a tough stance as the security crisis deepens, touring El Salvador's notorious maximum security prison and announcing plans to build one in his country. A growing part of the public in Latin America is saying, maybe it's worth trading some democratic freedoms and rights, if necessary, to empower the state to take a harder line against these criminal groups, Mr. Freeman said. The rise in crime is not universal. In Brazil and Mexico, the two most populous Latin American countries, the homicide rate has decreased in recent years, though experts say this does not mean criminal organizations have grown less powerful. In Ecuador, which has become a global drug corridor, President Daniel Noboa has declared 14 states of emergency. When 4 children were killed during a military patrol after being mistaken for gang members, Ecuadorians were shocked, raising questions about the cost of cracking down on crime. In Chile, even some voters who reject Mr. Cast's conservative stances opposing abortion and same-sex marriage say they would be willing to trade those rights for increased safety. I don't like what he wants to go back on things on which we progressed, said Mirna Matrovich, a retired accountant in Iquique, but we need him to bring back order. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the front section of the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. The next article is How a U.S. Rescue Firm Spirited Machado Out of Venezuelan to Get Her Nobel Prize by Karun Demajian and Simone Romero. The Venezuelan opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado, was determined to make it last week to Oslo, where she hoped to accept the Nobel Peace Prize in person. Emerging from hiding and finding a safe route to Norway would require skirting military checkpoints, enduring hours of rough seas, and making a leap in faith that no U.S. drone strike would obliterate the small vessels smuggling her to a Caribbean island where a private plane was waiting. She arrived in Norway too late for the prize ceremony. But her perilous escape exhilarated her supporters and underscored how Ms. Machado, who spent the last year in hiding from the regime of President Nicolas Maduro, remains a key player in the intensifying standoff between Caracas and Washington. The emerging details of her evacuation have also shed light on the usually secretive operations of a company run by U.S. veterans with special operations and intelligence training who orchestrated the effort to slip one of Venezuelans' most recognizable political figures out of the country without being caught. We were not the first people to try this, Brian Stern, the combat veteran who leads the firm, Gray Bull Rescue, said in an interview. Ms. Machado's rescue was the 800th for his Tampa-based group, which was organized in the wake of the chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, he said. But it posed a unique challenge, even for operatives with long experience in being hired to evacuate clients from risky environments. All of our infrastructure is designed for nobodies, and Maria is a somebody, said Mr. Stern. The challenge with this operation was her. While a representative of Ms. Machado's confirmed that Gray Bull Rescue handled her evacuation, not all elements of Mr. Stern's account could be independently verified. The Wall Street Journal was the first to report details of her escape. Venezuelan operatives had been trying for months to devise a way to spirit Ms. Machado, 58, a former lawmaker and election monitoring activist who gained renown for uniting Venezuela's fractious opposition to challenge Mr. Maduro out of the country so she could make it to Oslo. But it was not until December 5th that a personal contact introduced Ms. Machado's team to Mr. Stern, he said. Gray Bull Rescue had spent the last few months working from a base in Aruba to expand its Caribbean operations, anticipating that as the Trump administration escalated a pressure campaign on Venezuela, its extraction services would be in demand. The firm dubbed Ms. Machado's rescue operation Golden Dynamite. Gold from the 18-karat metal Ms. Machado would be awarded, and dynamite in homage of the most famous invention of Alfred Nobel, who established the prize. 4 days later, Ms. Machado, wearing a disguise, set off on her journey. Ms. Machado had a long history in Venezuelan opposition politics before she became a hunted woman in her own country. In 2023, she won an opposition primary to challenge Mr. Maduro in last year's presidential election. But when she became the frontrunner, the country's highest court barred her from running. In the summer of 2024, independently verified vote counts showed that Ms. Machado's chosen replacement, the soft-spoken retired diplomat Edmundo Gonzalez, had beaten Mr. Maduro by a wide margin. Authorities nonetheless declared Mr. Maduro the victor, and his government went on a repression campaign against critics of the outcome. Before her arrival in Oslo, Ms. Machado was last seen in public on January 9th, the day before the inauguration. Venezuela's government had said Ms. Machado could be considered a fugitive if she left the country, and it is unclear if she will be allowed to return without being arrested. Venezuelan authorities have imprisoned hundreds of her supporters. The first leg of her escape was by land. Ms. Machado and her handlers had to travel from the suburb of Caracas to where she'd been hiding, to a coastal village. Along the way, they encountered 10 military checkpoints, Ms. Stern said. Despite the fact that her face had recently been plastered on campaign billboards across the country, she evaded capture. Then came an even dicier part. On Tuesday evening, about 5 p.m. local time, a fishing skiff carried her from the coast of Venezuela to another boat where Mr. Stern was waiting. Using a series of vessels, they spent more than 10 hours navigating choppy waters and high waves as they crossed the Caribbean, headed toward the island of Curacao. Whipping winds, Turbulent waters and dark skies posed only one set of problems, however. The stretch of sea they traversed had been under heavy U.S. military surveillance as the Trump administration accelerated efforts to counter international drug trafficking by carrying out military strikes on boats of people suspected of smuggling. Multiple boats were involved and were transferring people, said Mr. Stern of Ms. Machado's rescue operation. He added that from the sky, that cannot look like something that it's not. The Trump administration's bombing campaign has earned widespread criticism from many lawmakers and legal experts who have condemned operations for killing unarmed civilians. The Pentagon has even been accused of potential war crimes over a September 2nd attack in which military officials appeared to target shipwrecked survivors from an initial strike. The administration brushed off the criticism, arguing that the strikes are a legal anti-terrorist operation. Ms. Machado has been an adamant supporter of the U.S. military campaign in the Caribbean, which has included at least 22 boat strikes killing at least 87 people. Her insistence that the U.S. military pressure was needed to force Ms. Machado from power touched off a wave of protests after her selection of the Nobel was announced. Before they hit the water last week, the U.S. government needed to be looped in. While Mr. Stern stressed that the administration has no role in planning or executing Ms. Machado's rescue, his team alerted U.S. federal agencies about the mission to avoid being fired on. We have deep contacts into every part of our government that matters, said Mr. Stern, rattling off a list of agency acronyms across the intelligence, defense, and diplomatic sectors that he coordinates with on a regular basis. We transmit up and say, hey, we're going to do a thing out here. We want to deconflict, he added, stressing that the Machado operation involved enough potential close calls without risking an unexpected encounter with U.S. government operatives. We are at risk of being killed by F-16s, Mother Nature, drones from the Navy, a bad guy on a boat who doesn't like us, seasickness, loss of comms, loss of navigation, a boat sinking, he said. It's unclear whether the U.S. military took any proactive steps to aid the rescue mission. American officials were told that Ms. Machado planned to leave Venezuela by water, so that the United States would not mistakenly target her or the vessel of her rescuers, according to U.S. officials briefed on the rescue. When reached for comment, military officials said they had no knowledge of the operation. A State Department spokesman did not respond to a request for comment. Mr. Stern said that Ms. Machado, whom he counts as a personal hero, has held her own on the grueling journey and had looked forward to reuniting with her family. He said that as the waves pounded the boat and drenched their clothes, they didn't talk politics. We talked about our kids. They reached Curacao, disembarking in the wee hours of Wednesday morning. About 3 hours and a much-needed shower later, Miss Machado was safely nestled on a private plane, wheels up, and bound for Oslo. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 14th issue of the front section of the New York Times. We read from the front section of the New York Times every Sunday at 1 p.m. Your reader has been Val Macer. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have a reading of the New York Times opinion page. Following that at 3 o'clock, the New York Times Arts and Leisure. And at 4 o'clock, a rebroadcast of this morning's Buffalo News. Radio Reading mails out a large print program schedule to our listeners every other month. If you have not received a Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service large print program schedule in the mail, please call us at 716-821-5555. We will make sure that you receive one every other month. A Braille version of the schedule is also available upon request. Our number again is 716-821-5555. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision,